Welcome to Last Call with Jamion Christian. Our guest today, Mike Tannenbaum. He has worked for 6 different professional teams, 1 minor league team, baseball team. I don't want to leave that out of there because I think that minor league baseball experience early in one's career is excellent. 5 different NFL teams. Last as an executive for VP for football operations for the Miami Dolphins. You can find him regularly giving great information on ESPN, which he's been there since 2019, and part of the 33rd team, which brings us to our conversation today. Mike, how are you this morning?
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm really excited about having you on. I love your coverage on ESPN, but also the 33rd team. I think that's excellent. How did that begin with getting all those different contributors on?
Yeah. One of my passions in life is I like to help others get to where they want to go. And when I was fortunate to get hired by ESPN, I went back to my roots was University of Massachusetts. They have a great sport management program and hired a couple of interns. And UMass was so happy with the process. They said, hey, we'll allow students to intern in the future for credits. And we match them with other coaches and GMs between opportunities, people like Doug Peterson and Jim Caldwell, Dan Quinn, amongst many others. And what we found was the students would get meaningful experience. We've placed 23 men and women with full-time jobs in the NFL. And then on the other side, we have executives, former players, coaches, broadcasters that need support, and they really like the support they get one-on-one. And then from there, a couple of people joined me, Joe Banner, a gentleman named Tony Petiti, and we had a couple of investors come in, so we were able to pay people now for their content. And what we try to separate ourselves with is the people that create content are either players or former GMs or former coaches, people that can bring it behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's again, if you aren't following it, it's a great follow on Twitter, and the information, I imagine now with the draft coming up, you're gonna dive into it even a bit more. What is it about that process? You said you really enjoy helping others get to where they want to go. Where did that begin?
I think it came from the standpoint that a lot of people were great to me. I had a dream of working in sports, and I had a lot of people that were very, very nice to me. And I just always knew that if I was fortunate for things to work out for me, I was going to help others. And, there's no greater joy than to see others get to where they want to go. And it's been great. There's been a lot of men and women that have come through and made the 33rd team a better organization, and then have been able to go on and achieve goals in their own right as well.
Yeah. One of the things that, and you probably don't, I'm one of the guys that shares a lot of your content because, you had like a guy, you had Bill Parcells on earlier in the year and just sharing a bunch of like different things from him. And I just feel like it's powerful for young coaches and young people trying to thrive. What is it about, leaders like Bill Parcells or Bill Belichick, those guys that just separate them from everybody else?
Great question. They kind of came out of the womb a certain way, really smart, innate leadership. I'm still very fortunate to be close to Coach Parcells to this day. Like, he was really hard to work for and made me a lot better. And, the sort of like the standards were the standards. And that applied to all of us. Coach Belichick, same way, tough, but very fair, very smart.
Yeah, it's, obviously, for fans or guys like myself, you get a chance to just read about them and some of their stories and some of the ways that they look at the game. One of the things with Parcells, like, I think he was out of football for like a year or two, like selling insurance or something, and then bounced back into the NFL. And these journeys as a coach, people are in or executives. You can be in and be out. You certainly had that in your career. What are some of the things that you've learned in the moments where you've been out of it that have really helped you to become the person you are today and help you become a better executive overall?
Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast. I want to get this right because I was literally just learning Jay Shetty, Shetty, and he had a gentleman on named Ed Mylett, Mylett. And the lessons they were talking about, I think, really apply to our conversation, which was how we sort of are born with like these hopes and dreams, and then human nature is, as we go through our experiences, we have a tendency to look back, but we should always constantly be looking forward. And I think that's sort of a mindset that I get up every day and say the best is yet to come. Like, I'm going to try to make this Monday better than last Monday. And I want to learn something today that I didn't know. And sort of like that mindset of like, there's been a lot of bad days, a lot of, things that have gone wrong. I've been let go. And somebody once gave me a great saying that, they thought basically like the gist of it was like, basically your former employer thought they were burying you. What they didn't realize were that you were a bean, and all that dirt and soil is just a way to fertilize you to make you even better. And I actually believe that. I really do. I think if you try to learn and grow from your past experiences, like never waste a setback, never waste a bump in the road, like those turn into opportunities if you take the best of it. And, one of the things at the 33rd team, we have a call every Wednesday. We try to stay current in the league. And one of the mindsets that we try to bring is like the key to life is like what you learn once you think you know it all, meaning like none of us ever know it all. And like there's always more to do, more to learn.
What is something that you thought you knew that once you got to your position, you're like, oh, I don't know much about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably, well, that's a really good question. I would say like having the ability to like listen and try to influence others when you don't necessarily agree with them, but need to do it in the construct of a relationship where you're dealing with the same people every day. And that's sometimes, it's an art form of, like the old expression, let's disagree, but we can't be disagreeable. And I think that's something that you got to constantly work on, because in these jobs, they're real partnerships. And, I was an assistant GM for 5 years. I tell this to assistant GMs today, literally, that you really need to act like you are a GM, and you should keep a journal and put down like what you would have done. The organization decided to do X. I wish we did Y. Well, I know for the 5 years that I was assistant GM, oftentimes what I had written down, I was wrong. And I always just say like, oh my God, I'm so fortunate that, I'm the GM of this yellow pad. Could you imagine if I was the GM of of an actual team? So that's a really good way to learn it and to hold yourself accountable.
I was a head basketball coach for 10 years, divisional basketball coach. You've obviously been a leader amongst leaders in these organizations. I always wonder in the professional ranks, it's going to sound really simple. How do you do it all? There's so many people. There's ownership. There's scouts. How do you come to one clear decision?
Yeah.
We're right near the draft right now. And I feel like that's one of the hardest things to do when you're talking about personnel. How do you do that?
Yeah. So for me, what I used to think about a lot was I was the point guard, and I would look to my left and the right was the head coach and owner. And I used to say to myself, like, if I had alignment with those two guys, I could take on the world. I thought I was a really good listener, trying to let people have, input in a meaningful way. And you want people to have a say, to make sure that their opinions were warranted. And then really try to make sure to say, like, once we make a decision, here's why we made it. And one of the challenges was like, even making decisions, I hated when people would find out on social media what we did instead of being able to, to talk about it some more. But that's just the reality of where we are. It was hard to let everybody know, but I think it was really having people feel like they had real ownership and buy-in, and then internally, as much as externally, explaining the why of the decision.
Yeah. I mean, because so many of these decisions, especially when you're dealing with players and systems, and some of these decisions are not like people on social media believe they're like clear-cut decisions, right? And I always say, like, every roster decision we made, they're all gambles. It's just how big a gamble you're going to take. This time of year, obviously, we're getting excited for the draft. What's going on inside these organizations, as they prepare for the draft?
Yeah, so you're crossing T's, dotting I's, and what I mean by that specifically is the draft process for like 2024 is going to start in about a month. People don't realize like the end of May starts the draft process, so it's an 11-month process. But you really have to make sure that like everyone's input is being heard, and then you're talking to the finer touches of making sure like if the coaches disagree, why, and security. So like give you a good example, Jalen Carter is an A player. There's no doubt about his ability. he was involved with a fatality. Two young people at the University of Georgia are dead. This is not a victimless situation. So I would want to make sure that we have all the information. Like, was this an aberrational situation, or is this person has he had other bumps in the road and not a good fit for us? So those are some of the things that you're spending a lot of time on this time of the year.
The background check. I actually have one of my former players going to be in the NBA draft. So that's one of the bigger things, trying to help him understand, like, they're going to dive into a lot of different things. What's the furthest you've gone back, in terms of looking into a person's background, or what kind of people would you connect with?
High school. And, one of my big beliefs is who you are in life is how you treat people that can't help you. The waiter, the waitress, the bus driver. So talking to a high school coach, talking to a high school equipment manager, you're going to really find out who that person is. And that's really important, because you're going to about to give this person a lot of money. So who they are at their core is really important.
Yeah. It's so interesting with the background stuff, because, I think as a player, growing up, you think my ability is always going to be better than my problems. And you've seen so many guys drop in the draft because of that, because their problems have kind of come to light. I want to talk a little bit about, you were part of the process with the Dolphins and probably these other organizations where you guys had to pick a head coach. What was that process like, and what were kind of some traits you were looking for? And, you just share a little light on that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's about leadership. And I think sometimes what you try to do is avoid the mistakes of, there's a great expression of, like, what got you here won't get you there. And sometimes someone can be a great, blitz designer, or can draw up red zone passing concepts, but that really has nothing to do with being a head coach. A head coach is scaling leadership. It's holding others accountable. So it's trying to understand, can they sit in that new seat, not the seat that they've had success in? And I think that's why you see people have problems, because while the jobs are obviously related, they're different. The skills are different. To scheme somebody open in a bunch formation, but then to suspend a star player because they did something wrong. Like, if you're the GM or the head coach, say, of the Timberwolves, and you saw what happened last night with Rudy Gobert, you're not prepared to make that decision. Like, you came up on one side of the ball. Like, you may know, like, a great, like, zone concept, or you may know something really intricate about off-ball movement. But do you suspend a player that you gave up, 4 number 1 picks for in the most important part of the season? Like, there's no book for that. And so you want to see what kind of process, what kind of decision making they have.
Okay, since we're on the Timberwolves thing, what I found really interesting with that is, you also had Jaden McDaniels break his hand against a wall in the game.
Right.
I just feel like there's a lot of frustration that's there. As a person who's coached the game and watched it from different platforms, to me, that'd be more alarming, right? That everyone's really frustrated. You're in the playoffs. You guys are playing pretty well. Why is everyone so frustrated in the most important time of the year when we need to be at our best?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, not what happened, but why it happened. And again, how do we learn to make sure that never happens again? And, there's just so many lessons there. But now the head coach and GM of the Timberwolves are sitting there with a really important decision, and everybody in their organization is going to look at you and say, like, okay, like, well, what do we stand for here?
Yeah. I always feel like the best players stretch you, but they never stretch you in that direction.
That's right. That's really well said.
Like, they challenge you with how far we can stretch things, how much we can do, how much more we should be able to do. But the best ones don't stretch you in that direction. We have to make a decision on character, discipline. That's really a losing formula.
Yeah. And then more importantly, it's not just stretching you in this situation, but then people are going to say, like, okay, well, what do you stand for in other situations? And that's where you don't want to have small problems become big problems.
That's when that alignment, you kind of hit on it earlier, that alignment becomes so important. Because now that conversation with the head coach, GM, ownership, if it goes all the way up there, depending on the organizations are different, that becomes so important.
100%. There's nothing more important than that, because again, it's a relationship business. And, like, especially like in the NFL where you have 90 players, things are going to come up over and over again. So if you're not aligned now, like on small things, imagine what it's going to be like on big things.
Yeah. Kind God, it like gave me like chills yesterday watching that, because I was like, man, you really want your team playing their very best this time of year, and you don't want to have to be dealing with that.
Right, because you're trying to win a championship, and any conversation that takes away from that is just it's taking us away from our goal. And now they're going to lose probably their best defender for the year, and they may be without Gobert as well.
Yeah, like last chance when Dennis Rodman took left during the finals. I think people underestimate what a special group of players that is to not let that affect them.
That's right.
Right. I mean, a mature group can maybe handle that, but an immature group, it just sort of really fractures. So we talk about leadership with our head coaches. We talk about, ownership. We've kind of dove in a little bit of that. Okay, let's talk more about the draft. Let's talk about selecting a quarterback, and why is it so hard to do?
Because it's by far the hardest position in all of sports, and so many different things. Like take Anthony Richardson, who's really a fascinating prospect. If he's a great player, I don't think anybody would be really surprised, because he has tremendous ability, height, weight, speed, great arm. It's all there. Like there's nobody that's going to look and not see like talent like oozing out of Anthony Richardson. He's only played in 13 games. Like usually, Hendon Hooker, the quarterback I like more than Anthony Richardson, started 37. And I think 24 games in college is very meaningful. Yeah. But if someone took Anthony Richardson early, you certainly couldn't blame him, because the talent's undeniable. But because of the inexperience, you don't know how it's going to go. And that's why it's so hard. There's so many very subjective indices of blocking schemes, play calling, talent around you. Like it's very, very hard to sort of like project how that's going to go. And every year you're going to see outliers. Last year we saw an outlier with Brock Purdy, literally the last player drafted who led the 49ers and played magically, right? So every situation is going to be a little bit different, but that's why it's so hard.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like, in the NBA, if you're a top 20 player coming out of high school, essentially you're going to be an NBA player. Like that's what that's the data says. If you're top 20 coming out of high school, you're going to be an NBA player. Now, whether you're being a Hall of Famer or, the 13th man, you just know. I feel like with the NFL and with football, there's no real metric like that. I mean, we have so many players that come off that are 2 and 3 stars that just kind of find their way in college. Why is that with football, that you really can't tell from how young they are to where they finish?
I think because of the physicality of football compared to basketball, it's just different. What you look like when you're an 18-year-old person as a young man is different than when you're 25. There was just a picture this weekend that was shocking. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a really good tackle that played for about 12 years in the league, Russell Okung, who was a really good player. He was a B+, maybe A-. And the last year, reportedly, he played at 310 pounds. Last night, over the weekend, he posted a picture on social media. He's 220.
Wow.
He lost 90 pounds.
And is still a strong man, a big man.
Yeah. Right? So the point being is, like, it's a grown man sport. There's boxing and there's weight divisions in combat sports. And that's why, football is different than basketball. Like the physicality is a huge differentiator.
How much and what are teams doing to evaluate guys like mental toughness and ability to handle adversity?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of the questions I would always ask somebody is, tell me something you worked really hard at in your life but were unable to accomplish. That's one of the questions I've always asked somebody, because that's, I think John Rahm is a great example. He won the Masters. He 4-putted the first hole.
Yeah.
Like that's mental toughness. And you're going to give them more time and more money going from college to pro. So it's really important to try to figure out, what their sort of like, what their ability is to, again, deal with those bumps in the road that invariably are going to happen.
Yeah. I'm like a huge football fan. I love watching football. I think it's just one of the greatest sports. And I remember watching Jalen Hurts at Alabama, right? And watching him kind of get benched for Tua. And it's so weird because as a guy who's coached it, like I'm not surprised at the level of success he's been able to have. even though there were some major bumps in the road and some bigger moments, because it always seemed like he had such mental resolve to say the right thing, to do the right thing. Have you seen other players? Have you worked with other players that you felt like had that kind of resolve?
Yeah, I saw with Curtis Spartan, Hall of
Mm.
Famer, who just always was a half a step ahead of his competition. He told me that going back to his rookie year, he hired somebody to literally do everything in his life, like pay bills.
Wow.
All he worried about was his playbook and his body. And he just saw it as like an investment. And going back to Jalen Hurts, there's a great expression this time of year that the tape sets the floor, but the character sets the ceiling. And Jalen Hurts got beat out at Alabama. He was good at Oklahoma, not great.
Yeah.
Went the second round, not the first round. Obviously, the rest is history. He's obviously a top flight quarterback, and it has everything to do with his character.
Yeah, and in those positions of leadership, the character really does matter. I think sometimes when we start talking about the measurables, we kind of push the character down. And when I say we, I mean people deciding on players, whether it's football or basketball. How do you weigh that risk reward?
Yeah, you have to be really careful because you can't have one really without the other. So that's really, really important. And you could take calculated risks, but you really want to make sure that you have a very firm sort of like base of operations and base of like you can take a calculated risk in. But if you don't have that culture to do that, things can go sideways in a hurry. And I'll give you a good example. Like, the Patriots had a great foundation. They could go get a Randy Moss or a Corey Dillon, and those players came in and thrived. But, there was a culture there that, stood for something, and that was built over, a number of years.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked to a lot of NBA teams this past year, and the NBA right now is the youngest it's ever been. I think the average age is like 25 years old, 26 years old, something so young. And, they'd kind of ask my opinion on their team. And I would say, well, I think bringing in the timely veteran is going to be really important, and knowing when that is, right? Like just when your team is hitting its point of getting a veteran player that just kind of ties it all together, that helps those guys become pros. The NBA used to be about, who are your vets? And the vets basically set the culture in the locker room. But now it's so young, your vets are only 24, 25 years old. I think the NFL will never be able to do that because it's a grown man league. But how do you influence rookies? Like you're talking about bringing in the right players. How do you get these rookies to buy into the culture, and how do you surround them with the right kind of people so they can be at their best?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes fundamentally like who you're bringing into your organization. Like, do they want to be coached? Do they want to be developed? I'm spending a lot of time on the front end of who we're bringing in to start with. Mm-hmm. And then that usually becomes a force multiplier because the great ones want to be coached. They want to be developed. And hopefully you've already had a program full of those sorts of people. And clearly the best teams I've been on, and I've been part of teams that went to 3 different championship games. They were guys that were selfless and wanted to see others have success. And when you do that and your whole program's filled with that, that's how players get better. And I think sometimes being football or basketball, people focus on the top down. Hey, the Ravens just signed OBJ. Well, that's great. That's headline driving news. But to have sustainability, you need the 53rd player to get better. You need the 12th man on the roster to get better. And that's how you win. Like when you look at the teams like the Warriors, they have great players, but they've also developed a lot of meaningful role players or players who've gone there and gotten better. Like Andrew Wiggins is a better basketball player there than he's ever been. And like, to me, that's how you have success is you have people that want to get coached and developed, and your organization's filled with those people.
Yeah, when you look at the 49ers, you talk about Brock Purdy. Like that's
Right.
a great example. I mean, they went down to their third quarterback, who's the last player taken in the draft. And, God willing, his surgery goes well. He'll be the starting quarterback for them next year and played outstanding. It seems like the 49ers are one of these teams that consistently kind of has, I don't even want to call it luck. They've consistently kind of been able to sub the next guy in. What is it that they're doing that's just a little bit different than most?
Yeah, I think they, Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch do a great job. They identify, key players that they have to have. They put a lot into their defensive line and, make their strengths even better. Like they go out and get Javon Hargrave, who's a great defensive lineman, and make a strength of their team even better. And they've produced a lot of other GMs and head coaches, and they've done truly a remarkable job.
Yeah, Bill Walsh really got that culture rolling out there, and it's found a way to kind of stay consistently through the years. And you see that with a few organizations, and you have some organizations that are still trying to figure it all out. Before I let you go, this year's draft, what position do you think is the deepest where there's just a lot of good players?
Offensive line. I was just watching it this morning. Peter Skronsky from Northwestern, and there's probably a dozen guys. Like another name I'll give you that I love is DeJuan Jones. He's from Ohio State. Paris Johnson will go before him, but DeJuan Jones could play in the NBA. He's like 6'9", 360, just a massive person. And then Darnell Wright from Tennessee. There'll be a number of guys that go probably starting at 9 or 10, right around where the Bears are picking, right through the Packers, Jets, Patriots. I think.
Yeah. Did you like what the Bears did trading back?
I didn't. I think Bryce Young's would be a better quarterback than Justin Fields. But if you're going to trade back, I thought they made a great trade.
Yeah, I think it's so hard with the quarterbacks. Like with a guy like Justin Fields, I don't know. Like we were having this discussion this weekend with a few friends. It's like the Giants gave Daniel Jones a ton of time to kind of get there. And it's like, how much time do you give a guy like Justin Fields? And when do you know when to step off of that? I feel like that's such a hard decision.
Right. Yeah, it is. And that's why correctly evaluating your own is a big part of team building.
Yeah. We do this thing here on Last Call. It's the end of the night, the last call, the bell's rung by the bartender. You've got two people beside you. On your left side, it's someone who's retired, cannot be family. On the right side, you have someone who's still active and working. What two people do you want beside you?
Larry Bird and Dan Quinn.
Ooh, why Larry Bird?
All-time great player. He was my hero role model growing up. He willed himself to being a great player, and he just has inspired me my whole life. And Dan Quinn is a selfless leader who's a winner, who is always preaching about be where your feet are, about getting better. And when you're around Dan Quinn, it's impossible to have a bad day.
Yeah, I've heard that about Dan Quinn. We've had a few guests on the show that happen to be connected with him, and they speak the world of him. So, well, Mike, I appreciate you taking the time with us on Last Call. We love all the stuff you're putting out there. We love the fact that you want to change the world by working through people and helping them get to where they want to go. Thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on The Last Call, powered by Speakeasy, where careers grow through relationships and relationships grow through Speakeasy. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.